All right. Welcome, everyone. This is all about auditing your Pardot account. It's like the movie The Accountant. If you can think about accounting and auditing, an audit can either be really boring, like the people that come in with the clipboards and look through all that paperwork, or it could be really exciting, like the movie The Accountant. If you haven't seen that movie, it's pretty crazy. And I'm just going to borrow a little bit from the theme here and there today. But we're going to have fun. We're going to have like an action-packed thriller version of fun for our Pardot auditing here on this particular webinar. It's also not your average webinar. If you haven't joined us before, I will introduce myself in a second. But if you're new to this whole thing, we have fun here. So you'll hear me consistently talking to Brian and TJ and Rob, who are in the chat, saying hi to each other, asking questions, keeping this thing interactive, right? So if you hear me randomly start answering a question or randomly start talking or thanking someone, I'm just responding to the chat. So if you're catching the recording and you can't make it, no worries. That's why we have this. But one of these days, we hope to catch you on the live thing so you can interact and ask your questions as they happen. If you have a question and obviously it's not live, just shoot me an email, casey@CheshireImpact.com. And we're happy to get you an answer for that. All right, let's get going. Real quick, we break the fourth wall. I already said it's a crazy webinar, and I'm going to talk about all sorts of different things and acknowledge people that are here, but also just want to smash with Thor's hammer. And I do have Thor's hammer, by the way, everyone. Check this bad boy out right here. I use this on the podcast. So I'm going to smash the fourth wall. Yes, I'm presenting, but let's have discussion over the presentation. Let's also talk reality over the silver bullet bullshit that oftentimes you see in marketing webinars. Let's talk about what we need to do to make our Pardot accounts better. That's why we're here. And I will share whenever I can experience over just sales pitching and that kind of stuff. All right. So that's not what we're here for. We're here to just share experiences and get some learnings in. And for those of you who can't see the video, I am sharing my video. I don't think I look that much like the main character here, but today I'm your auditor. I'm your auditor today, the action-packed thriller, and I come packing heat full of Pardot weapons, and we're going to have some fun today. So my name is Casey Cheshire, and I am happy to be here. Just 3 numbers to introduce you to me by. 12 or so, it blurs. Number of years I've been working with Pardot, and I still love it to this day. We're still happily married, me and Pardot. 2,600, the number of Pardot implementations that Cheshire Impact has done. It's amazing to think about that number. And is it not a humble brag? Maybe, but more importantly, that's also just to share that a lot of the things here and a lot of the strategies we've learned over time is by helping people and watching and working with them, watching some do it right, some do it wrong, us doing it ourselves right and wrong, and adjusting and coming up with really a formula and a framework for how to get things done in Pardot. And really how to maximize the tool comes from experience. Finally, 32. Any guesses what that number means? Anyone? Anyone out there in the chatter universe? Any guesses what that means? Oh, I love that. Beers you've had today. How old you are? Thank you, both of you. Michael's got it. It's the number of skydives that I've done. I do like some skydiving here. I wonder if they'll open up that drop zone pretty soon. That'd be cool if they did that. But either way, beers, I'll accept that as well as how old I am. I'll take that one too. So later on, we can chat skydiving, Pardot, mountain climbing, you name it. Cheshire Impact, if you don't know who we are yet, we'll talk about us later, but we're not here to pitch anything. Cool. Do you have the book yet? Anyone in the chat, do you have this book yet? Marketing Automation Unleashed. It's on where? It's on Amazon. Hey, Kate, good to see you. I know you have the book. Raise your hand. That's awesome. Do you have the book? If you do, a lot of what we're going to be talking about here today is in the book. There's actually a whole chapter. Hey, I see a yes from Christina. There's a whole chapter on every single topic we're going to talk about in this particular audit process. And dun, 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 in true entertaining fashion, we're going to have a way for you to get this book at the end of the webinar. Even those listening to the recording, there's a way for you to get this book for free at the end of this webinar. So again, stay tuned to that and or check it out on Amazon while we're here. We have it on Kindle, and I'm contemplating doing an Audible, but we'll see. We'll see what happens here with that. Okay, today's agenda. Let's put all the stuff on the whiteboard. By the way, it's so much fun drawing on glass like that with dry erasers. So much fun. So what are we going to talk about today? First of all, technical gotchas. There's a lot of strategy talk here. There's a lot of things to get you really building the right system that you need. But before we get to that, there's just some table stakes we got to address. And sometimes when you think of Pardot audit, those are the things you think of. So we're going to nail those right away so we can set our sights higher on an even better Pardot account. Then we're going to talk about the 3 challenges that Pardot marketers face. There are at least 3, and they're big ones. Then we'll talk about this thing we created called CSI. It's a framework and a roadmap for marketing automation. So we'll talk about that. There's 4 phases of it. We're going to walk through each phase. And each one of these phases has some steps we want to address. And it really gives us, this is the whole framework for this audit that we're going to do on our own Pardot account. Finally, how to interpret the results and what to do about it. And then what are some next steps we can take? And in that section, that's where we have the way you can get the book sent to you during quarantine, or anytime, whenever you hear this recording. Okay, let's do it. Technical gotchas. Sometimes this is what we think about when we think about an audit. Like, please make sure I'm not breaking anything. Like, did you know in WordPress, there's a little checkbox. If you have it checked off, you block Google from indexing your site. Just a tiny little checkbox in the setting. If you check that accidentally, your site becomes invisible to Google. It's those kind of things, right? Oh, you can check that on your site too. That's a bonus for you. Okay, technical gotchas. 1, do you even implementation? Which is, if I had $1 or 10 or 100 or 1,000 for every time we work with someone and they don't have some of the things that you're supposed to set up inside of an implementation, a Pardot implementation. There's just a standard list. And sometimes either you did it yourself or the person before you did it themselves, or you had a partner that wasn't Treasure Impact, no judgment, then you may have some of these things not set up. So it's really important you just, if you don't even know what they're called, you definitely want to dive into them or shoot me an email. I can send you a link on them. We don't really have time to go into each one of these today, but they're important. Email authentication. And by the way, if you've set one of these things up, you can just claim it in the chat. That'll make it exciting for us. Do you know if you've done your email authentication? If yes, no, maybe so, not sure, and haven't heard of that, you just throw that in the webinar chat, and that kind of helps me customize it to you. So email authentication, very important. That just gives Pardot permission to email on your behalf. You're going to see deliverability go up. You're going to see open rates go up. A lot of things are going to go up if you give Pardot permission to email on your behalf, because otherwise you're just spoofing, and you can spoof from any location and you just look like a spammer. So it's important to set that up. Branded subdomain. If you don't have a branded subdomain set up, then all the links in the emails you send in Pardot will be replaced with go.pardot.com links. That looks weird, somewhat unprofessional, and can make people think you're trying to track them, which maybe you are, but you don't want to make it so obvious. The other thing that will happen is all your landing pages and all the URLs in your landing pages will be Pardot landing page URLs. And you don't want that. You want your brand to shine. So make sure you have that set up. Finally, tracking code. I know I have to put it in there, but we have crazy people. Not that you're crazy, but there's crazy situations out there where you may not have Pardot tracking code on every page in your site. That's right, every page. Don't pick and choose. You put it in the common footer, common header, and it is going to go out to every page. You want to track as much as possible. By the way, if you have microsites or other kind of sites that aren't your site, still do tracking code. You can give it a separate campaign tracking code. So you can track it separately. Like we track the hardcoremarketing.com. That's one of our podcasts, and also PardotLifeHacks.com. We track those separately in our Pardot account with separate tracking codes. It's awesome. So you can do that too. Another thing that happens, one time I was doing an audit of a Pardot account, and yes, we can do deeper dives if you're interested. Treasure Impact, we're here to help. But one time I was doing a deep dive audit on someone, looking at their forms and all the different ways they're using every single object in their whole site, in their whole Pardot account. And I looked at their forms, and there was just one form they used most. It was on their homepage. And by the way, I don't really encourage you to use just one form, and it's like a catch-all on your homepage, but that's what they were doing. But one of the things when I looked at this form is they had it on kiosk mode. Does anyone know what kiosk mode is? If you do, just do your thumbs up, your hand raising in your Zoom, or you can perfect. Awesome. Thank you for doing that. I can see your hands, Barbara, Michael, right on. So if you know what kiosk mode is, it's very handy if you're doing a kiosk in a trade show, because what it means is you can have a laptop or an iPad, and you can hand it to someone, and they can type their name into it, their email, and hit enter, and that could be a Pardot form, a Pardot landing page. They go right into your system, and then it can refresh and bring it up to be filled out again and again and again and again, and it won't cookie that iPad as Barbara or as Casey or whoever. It'll actually make it, it'll just not cookie that device at all, and understands that, it's being used as a kiosk. Well, this particular company had their main form on their main site on their homepage that got filled out by hundreds and thousands of people. They unintentionally had it in kiosk mode, which meant no one was getting cookied, which meant they didn't know anyone. They didn't have anyone cookie. They didn't know the activity of anyone specifically. And that could be half the battle with Pardot, getting some of that engagement information. So that's a big thing to check out. Just make sure your forms don't have kiosk mode. It's in the advanced settings on each form. When you go through the wizard, you'll find it there. Another thing, AMPSIA. Have you heard of this? AMPSIA, allowing multiple prospects with the same email address. Okay, I see some hands right on. That, by the way, that's totally cool. I love seeing the hands raised. I'll just assume you're doing like a party on Casey move, or maybe like a whoop whoop every time you raise your hand. They do need that option in Zoom. We'll have to ping them. So AMPSIA, this allows you to essentially break Pardot. And instead of having the email address as a unique identifier in Pardot, it allows you to have a unique identifying number, which is the way they do it inside of Sales Cloud, right? Now, this seems like a good idea, but it's actually not. And so I would say, please don't do this. And usually once you do this, you can't backtrack unless you get your own separate account. It's really messy. What this does is, yes, it allows people to be in there twice with the same email address, but also means that if you ever import a list, you can automatically make duplicates. Well, that's the trouble with importing into Salesforce. So that's why Pardot, by allowing the email address to be unique, you can use Pardot as a filter. So you always upload things into Pardot first, especially a list of people at a trade show. If it already exists, it won't create a duplicate. That's magic. Don't break that. Sometimes people coming over from Marketo have that sort of built in over there, and it makes things messy. So when you come over to Pardot, you got to clean up your duplicates. It's just what you got to do. Okay. And finally, using scoring everywhere. If you use scoring, and then we'll talk about scoring a little bit here, you want to make sure you resist the temptation to add a little score here, add a little score there, add a little score here. What happens if you do that when you're cooking? A little salt here, a little salt there, a little salt here, right? If you're Emerald Lagasse of the Salt Kingdom and you bam all over the place, what happens? You end up with a very salty dish, okay? Why does this dish taste like salt? Because you kept adding salt everywhere. So you want to do your scoring very much like seasoning a dish. You want to use it certain times, certain places, and be consistent about it. Otherwise, you get some craziness happening. And I once worked on an account where they use scoring in every different place in Pardot where you can have automation rules and completion actions allows you to change the score. That doesn't mean you should. And I was once working on an account, and actually it was a CRM, can't name any names, but it was a CRM that is now a competitor, obviously with Salesforce, and they were using Pardot, and they had modified score everywhere, and they had no idea what the scoring meant or said because it was just crazy. You couldn't read it. So they had to clean all that out. Finally, campaign reporting without campaign tracking. There's a lot of really cool stuff. I know we had a lot of webinars on using multi-touch campaign tracking, using B2B marketing analytics. Guess what? All of that requires campaign tracking. Longer conversation. If you are interested, we can get you links to all those. If you go to CheshireImpact.com, the resources page, there's webinars, there's all the recordings. There's ones on campaign tracking. There's ones on connected campaigns if you've not done that yet. It's important to do that because otherwise your campaign reporting is blank. It doesn't show anything because you're not doing campaign tracking. The rest, look at Salesforce. Usually, if something's still going awry, it means there's something else that needs to be set up inside of Salesforce, or perhaps something to do with the connection between the two. And as always, Casey at CheshireImpact.com if you have a real doozy, and I'm happy to take a look at it. Cool. Table stakes, we got them? All right. This webinar is brought to you by mini cans of Diet Dr. Pepper. The fresh maker. Oh, no, that's somebody else. The sweet one, right? Remember the little guy with the purple hair? Yeah. Okay. So let's get to this. Looks like we have one quick question. Yeah, great. Thanks for throwing it in there. I don't always see the Q&A interface as much as the chat, but I can totally hop in there. If you have kiosk mode on in a URL with UTM parameters, comes in and fills out the form, will kiosk mode break that JavaScript? Great question. Great question. I will have to get back to you on that because my guess is no. You could always test it, but my guess would be kiosk mode. It's actually ignoring all those things. It's ignoring the actual platform and everything. And also not pulling in the Google Analytics information on that one. So that is my guess. Do test it or not. Just see, we can follow back up with you to see we can test it from our end too. But great question. But ideally with kiosk mode, nothing is brought. It remembers nothing because it goes, well, this platform is clearly owned by the owner, not by the visitor. So it should actually ignore everything that comes in on the URL parameters. So interesting question. Very interesting. Cool. All right, let's talk about it. There are 3 challenges to go over here, and then we're going to talk about the solution that we can address with this type of Pardot auditing. Okay, so challenge number 1, activity. Who here is busy? Who here is a busy marketer? If you are, claim that busyness. Give me a hell yeah in the webinar chat. Raise your hand. Who here is busy? And you know what's funny? I see a lot of hands. Holy crap, across the whole screen, lots of hands. Yeah, we're all really busy. And I bet that felt good to raise your hand. Oh, they're still coming up. That's perfect. Keep raising your hand. Just keep pumping it in the air. You know what? We're all super busy. Even when you have quarantine and things, we're staying at home. I find myself busier. I don't know if anyone else has found themselves. I'm on more Zoom calls than I was beforehand. It's kind of, and I was on Zoom calls all the time beforehand. It's weird, wacky. Either way, we're all super busy. The challenge can be, you can feel like this guy who keeps walking and walking and walking, and he's in a bit of a hamster wheel, right? I don't know if he's powering his own workstation, but he is not going anywhere. He's not moving forward. He's not moving backward. A lot of times I felt this as a marketer when I was sending the monthly campaign. Okay, let's send it this month. Okay, let's do it this next month and the next month, and never felt like anything changed or got better or improved. We just were kind of like in the hamster wheel to send the campaign every month, right? And what's crazy, and somebody quoted me on this, and now I'm quoting myself. It's called marketing automation. If after a year you're not automating, something's wrong. Now, note I gave you a year, right? I gave myself a year for that, but really you can start automating quite quickly on that one. You know, the idea is you can still send out those monthly campaigns, but the ones that are really good, you want to start moving those into drip campaigns. You want to start moving those into nurtures so that you're not constantly having to do the one-off thing. Whenever we can, even internally, if there's a conversation about something, it's like, how can we put that into an automation? How can we put that into simplify, right? Well, we could send out our own emails like this every month. Well, how can we simplify? How can we build out a nurture for the first 100 days? The first 100 days of a customer is vitally important. There's books on this, all sorts of topics. Let's automate parts of that, right? So that's what we're trying to go for. Otherwise, there's a lot of busy work. And you know, one of the challenges with the busy work, you know, real quick story. I once had, and you may have heard this on the podcast, I once had a CEO who asked me, Casey, the young marketer, a few years ago, and he said, how many emails did you send this month? And I had said, this is before marketing automation. I had said about 1 million. And he said, great, next month, send 1.5 million, right? As if be a little more busy and we'll get a little more done. But we know that that's not the case. Intrinsically, we know spamming, sending a bunch more emails to the same people is going to annoy them. Finding more random people to send emails to, that's not what we're looking for here. There's something better, right? So that is a challenge that we want to address. Second thing, distraction. Have you guys seen this, the Martech 5000? Chief Martech, if you don't follow him on Twitter, or you can see it on there, chiefmartech.com. Super cool guy. I was able to interview him on the podcast. Totally recommend you check out that episode. Maybe we'll throw a link in there. Brilliant dude. But he has this thing where he looks at all the different marketing softwares that are out there, and that list keeps growing. I think he said at the beginning when he first did it, you know, decades ago, it was like 80. There were 80 different marketing software tools out there that marketers could buy. Now, thousands. So now that there are thousands, we can get distracted. And I don't know if you're like me, like a marketing cat looking at a laser on a wall. Who has cats here? Who has cats? Crazy, right? But we're no different. If a fire truck went by your office or your home right now, and you heard it, and there was a window, I'm probably looking, right? I've seen a few fire trucks in my day, but I'm probably still going to look at that fire truck. We get that same way with marketing technology, don't we? Right? Especially in the trap can be, well, this magical technology will solve all of our problems. And we know it's not really the case, but we're kind of hoping it will fix our social or fix our alignment with sales, and so we can get distracted. We might have even bought marketing automation for that same reason, that we was going to magically fix everything. and it doesn't necessarily do that. The challenge with this, and challenge with number 2 is that, okay, you got marketing automation. You're here. We're here to talk about it. You may even learn some things today. But what happens if tomorrow you hear about a new technology? You need to resist the urge to go get that until you've fully maximized a lot more use of Pardot, right? And so until you've done a lot more with Pardot, resist the urge to go get to the next one and go get the next one. It'd be much better if you really built out Pardot. I mean, low-hanging fruit, right? Really build out some Pardot things. We'll talk through some of the great things you can do, and that'll be far better than any of these new techs you can get right now. But once you do that, once you build that foundation, you'll be able to plug in other technology and really make the most of it too, because you've got everything clean with your marketing automation system. I see marketing automation as like the spine of the marketing, right? So if that thing's messed up, man, you can't walk, you can't run, you can't anything. So we got to get that thing cleaned up first. Second challenge is there's a lot to do, right? Not only are we busy, but there's a lot to Pardot, right? There's a lot to it. Have you ever heard of that phrase, how do you eat an elephant? Okay, what's the answer? Work with me here. I know you know the answer. I know it's silly, but throw it in the chat, because why not? Okay, free beer for everyone here, free virtual beer if you answer this. One bite at a time, Michael. Thank you. Hey, Kate, you too. Awesome. Hey, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time? Well, I was curious, how many bites are there in an elephant? How would you eat that one at a time? So I did the math. Here's a forest elephant, 5,000 pounds roughly, 16 ounces per pound, 2 bites per ounce. Christine, I think, did we work on this? We did the math. Equals about 160,000 bites. That's a lot of bites, okay? That's a lot of food. Now we can do the math and figure out how many meals that is. All I know is that's a lot. But guess what? That seems like a lot to eat an elephant. Pardot's even bigger. Eat more bites with Pardot. I did the math. 83 navigation menus, a bunch of different results on Trailhead. Maybe you have 6 buyer demographics, right? Buyer personas. Multiply all that together, you got 431,000 bites. So there's a lot to Pardot. So with that, sometimes not only can we be distracted by other technology, we can be distracted by other parts of Pardot. Like, how often is that true? Especially if you see a email or a blog post from another consultant that's not Treasure Impact. And what do they say? I once read this post, and I can't tell you who it was that wrote it, but it really drove me crazy, because it was like the 8 most unused features of Pardot you should probably try right now. Okay, maybe we should try them right now, or maybe they're unused for a reason. But the thing is, we shouldn't just randomly try features. And I got to be honest, Pardot in the old days might have kind of fostered this as well. They might have told us in their marketing, hey, here's a cool feature, try it. But maybe that's not the feature you should be using, right? But then we get distracted and go try to set it up. Case in point, I want to do multi-touch attribution. I want to know first, middle, and last touch on deals with someone who's not touching their customer, right? So I've definitely seen this where I go in to set up multi-touch tracking, and there is no touches to track. So you got to do the touches before you can really get a sense for the tracking of it, right? So there is a cart before the horse. There is an order to this, you kind of sense. But without that, you just have a bunch of bytes, and that can be distracting. All right, so what's missing? We were kind of talking about it already. And again, 2,600 Pardot implementations, that's a lot. It would be wicked cool to put everyone that we've worked with all together to have a big, massive Chesh party. We should talk about that. Who would come to a big, massive Chesh party? In a little bit, after this whole thing clears up, but who would come? Raise your hand. Awesome. We'll make sure you all come to this massive party. So here's the deal. What's missing? A roadmap. Realized this a couple years ago when we had those blog posts that were happening. We're just like, what? People. And here's another challenge. And I've been guilty of this. I've seen people where this happens. You do some training with us even, right? Some kick-ass, top of the line, best practice training. You know how to use Pardot. Awesome. And then, off you go on your own. Then the question is like, well, what do I do with Pardot? There's so many things I could do with it. What do I do first? What do I do second, third, fourth, fifth? There's so many things you do. Sometimes we end up just sort of backtracking and doing the monthly campaign over and over and over again. I don't know if that you can relate to that. Well, roadmaps are totally crucial. And here's a picture of one. And this is a picture that is taken from NASA's actual plan to land on the moon for the Apollo missions. And they had a huge, massive checklist, which would appeal to our checklist friends. And I like the graphics, so that appeals to me. But they actually did a graphic, which is cool, not just the written word, but the actual visual picture. Sometimes that can help make sure we're all on the same page too. We do that, by the way. We help map out buyer processes and customer journeys with customers. And it helps because you just see it visually. So NASA did this for their lunar mission. Why? Because there's certain things, and it sounds cliche, but look, if you fire the return to Earth rockets as you're landing on the moon, that's a problem, right? Or if you don't rotate and you don't connect with the command module before trying to land, or if you don't separate those things out before trying to land, you're not getting home, right? There's so many steps that need to happen: first, second, third, fourth, fifth. You see 66, 74, the descent, all those different things, 77. If you do any of this out of order, it's catastrophic for NASA. And it may not be catastrophic for us in Pardot, but it could easily get to the point where it may waste a bunch of time, put the whole situation in jeopardy. It's a problem, right? So we created this roadmap for marketing automation. It's called the CSI. And that acronym is just way too good to pass up, right? CSI, the Cheshire Success Index. The whole idea is there's 10 key core areas of Pardot that you should be using. 10 of them. Just 10. There's a lot of cool things underneath those 10, like sub-bullets and sub-bullets of that, but they all really bake into 10 areas. And so with that, we put them together. And it's also a roadmap because it's in order. So it doesn't just say, okay, are you doing email? Are you doing landing pages? Are you doing data? It's like, no. It's not a random, roll the dice and choose what you want to do next. I know. But Casey, I just want to try something. No. There's a roadmap. You got to do them in order. And so the cool thing is we actually built it into an assessment. So there's something you can do, and we'll give you information on it later, where we hop on the phone with you, like myself or someone from the team hops on the phone with you. And for 25 minutes, we go through these questions, and we kind of like ask questions after that. And then we get a sense for how are you using each and every one of these things. And we come up with a score together. And the score is essentially 0 if you're not doing that thing, 0.5 if you're kind of doing it, and 1 if you're totally doing it. The reason I tell you this is we're going to go through all of these things. And I want you to be thinking in your head, keep score, right? Keep score. It's kind of an unofficial CSI, but that's cool. I just want you to know where you're at. The goal is when you have a number with all those added up at the end, you'll know between 0 and 10 where you're at. And I think sometimes the problem I had is I just didn't know where I was at. I mean, the gut feel might say, I think I'm kind of using Pardot, but not totally. I'm not really sure how well I'm using it. Right? Or I talk to someone and they're not doing very much at all, so I feel better. If I talk to someone who's doing even better and I feel worse, I don't know. With this, you'll have a number. You also know the next step, because the lowest number that's incomplete is where you got to start. That's where you got to start, because you got to build that foundation. Finally, you know what a 10 looks like. The lunar landing, first person on the moon, you're excited. That's you. You get to celebrate. You're on the moon, planting the flag for your company on the Pardot moon. So cool. So we're going to go through these things. And the makeup of it, I already mentioned the scoring, but each one of these things has a question. And I think it's so helpful, even in our day-to-day lives. There's some simplicity, right? Whenever you have complexity, it's the enemy of execution. So if you can get simple for just a second and say, okay, what am I really trying to do here? What's the goal of this particular thing? And you could say yes, no, or maybe so. That gives you a little bit of clarity in terms of what you're doing. So each number will come with a question, and think in your mind, in your head, am I doing that or not, right? So let's talk through, and we don't have all the questions listed, just to kind of encourage you to do the questions with us and get a more accurate score, but we are going to talk about the different topics that each one has. All right, here is a picture of all 10, and we're going to go through all of those together here. And perfect. We're on time. We're on time, people. And I see I've neglected the Q&A interface. My bad. How often are you cleaning your ESPs up, refreshing old creative, changing up landing pages, etc.? Good question. How often are we doing that? Well, I think when it comes to prioritization, you'll see in the prioritization that happens here, and you'll see there's steps that have to happen first, second, third, fourth, fifth. There is certainly a time to build, which you'll see here in phase 2. Phase 2, we're going to talk about each and every one of these. We're going to be building gated content, landing pages, and then the nurtures to go with them. We could just stop there and keep testing and optimizing them, but actually that happens in phase 4 for us. So you're going to get something active, something built on the ground, start building out multiple nurtures, and they've got to align with sales. And then phase 4, I call that the cycle of optimization, because after 4 is 4 and is 4 again, is 4 again. You get to hang out in phase 4 and do continual testing. So my thought for you and your question is, when do you refresh those? Is when you get to phase 4, because that way all the bases are covered. You're aligned with sales. And now you just want to make things better and better and better. And phase 4 is a great place to hang out. And what is my favorite planning tool or process before building out big old automation trees? Good question. Good question. A lot of us will like to use Visio. Really just your run-of-the-mill mind mapping tool can be really helpful. Like a low-cost version of Visio, just to get some kind of mapping. I think it's really important, or just draw it, right? Either way, you gotta draw it out first, so you get a sense for where you're starting, where you want to go with your nurture campaigns, and that could be a real help. That way you don't just start building and have it sort of spiral out of control. You kind of more deliberate, intentional about your drip campaigns. Cool questions. Yeah, Lucidchart, that's a good one. I like that. When installing a new instance of Pardot, is it crucial to remove an old version if your organization has a version archived? New instance of Pardot. Where is it archived? It's interesting. Typically, Pardot accounts, all that data lives in Pardot. You just get a new Pardot account. It's clean. It's nice. If you're talking about removing things from the Salesforce account, you probably want to clean up some of the old connectors. But as long as that's done, you may want to look at maybe wiping scores if you want to wipe scores, or seeing what kind of things might go back into Pardot. Yeah, you can send it an email. That's totally cool. Cool. I like it. Good questions. Good engagement. You guys are doing great. All right, sweet. Let's get into the foundation phase, right? I don't know if you've seen this, but like buildings, you can build deep, right? The foundations are critical. What happens if you don't have a foundation? Your building freaking doesn't work. It falls over, anything, right? So foundations are super deep. They're super, super strong. But when you get the foundation going, you can go as high as you want, right? Just about, if you're in Dubai. And I have a question here. We have 2 brands with 2 different websites. Can we still separate our lists, emails, sending domains while not having to buy an additional license? Yes. Yes, you can have 2 different branded subdomains, 2 different domains listed, 2 different email sending domains, 2 different websites. Totally cool. Track those websites with separate tracking code. Yep. Your lists. Now, in terms of like, you can see the list, but just don't touch it. Yeah, everyone will still see all the lists in your account. But as long as you aren't touching them, right, you can just label them separately. Brand A, brand B. And so then you just sort by brand A and you get all your lists that way. Brand B, get a list that way. Make sure your suppression lists are keeping track of the 2 different brands. You can totally do that. There is another thing. You can actually do multiple domains, right? So there's a multiple domain feature that lets you actually choose to have 2 different separate domains, and that actually will keep the information completely separate across 2 different it's essentially like 2 different Pardot accounts. Now, there are some pros and cons to that. The con is you can't share things. You can't share assets. You can't share context or anything, and it gets kind of complicated connecting to Salesforce. We have a webinar on that topic, Maggie. It's a great question. So if you want, shoot me an email, casey@CheshireImpact.com, or we'll just send you a link to that. Because we did a whole Q&A. We have one of the 12 poobahs that know everything about multiple domains. And so we can get you information on that. We are upgrading to Pardot Advanced, which has a separate division. Okay, cool. Not sure if that was a question or not. But I'm excited. You're upgrading to Pardot Advanced, which has a separate division. No question. Hey, congrats. That's awesome. There's a lot of stuff, Mary, in the advanced, which is like so much fun to play with. So enjoy that. There's some really cool features to that. That's how you're gonna handle the issue. Yeah, well, thank you for doing that. Thank you for throwing out how you're gonna handle that issue. Perfect. Yeah, totally cool to answer questions for each other in the chat. I love that. Totally. We're all one big community, right? All right, foundation phase. There's 3 elements. The different numbers in this roadmap are called elements. And so the first one is understanding your buyer and segmentation. So this particular question, we're trying to figure out if you're sending your email to everyone or you're sending emails to certain groups and certain lists. And you can even say that in the webinar chat, like, hey, how many of you are sending to everyone? Or how many of you are sending targeted emails to one group or another group? You're not just sending to the whole list at the same time. That's one of the things we're trying to address with the first phase. And some of the things that help do that is doing things like buyer personas. There's a difference between buyer personas and profiles. And then also dynamic segmentation, right? Once you have a sense for who the different groups are, you can set Pardot up to separately put them into their own lists automatically, so that you don't have to care and feed for the list. They care and feed for themselves. By the way, one of the things we do every month here, we do at least 1 or 2 CSI webinars on each and every one of these elements. So one month there might be a CSI number 1 webinar, and there might be a CSI number 3 webinar that you can sign up for. And they've all been recorded already. So on CheshireImpact.com, resources, you go down to webinars and you'll see recordings for each and every one of these. So if you want a deep dive on understanding your buyer and buyer personas versus profiles, go grab that webinar. It's a whole hour plus of content on that very topic. Number two is all about first touch ROI. Who here knows where the revenue driving leads come from? If you know, raise your hand, right? Be proud, because that's a really important thing. Awesome. I see some hands being raised. Not all of them being raised though. And this can be one of the challenges, but you know what? It's so easy in Pardot to set up some campaign tracking, some first touch campaign tracking, that this is early on, because one of the things that happens when you set up first touch ROI tracking is suddenly you become part of the team. You're driving revenue, because if you're connecting Pardot and Salesforce, you get to see how much money your leads are buying based on how much money you invested, and you start that whole conversation. You move from being a cost center or the marketing shop that just makes things pretty to being part of the revenue team. And so first touch ROI tracking is hugely important. And once you've got your understanding of who your buyer is, you then go look to set up the first touch tracking. Real quick story. We had one group we worked with. They're doing 80 trade shows a year. That's a lot. They did not have first touch ROI tracking set up. Any guesses how, and they didn't know which which events were successful. Any guesses on how many of those 80 events they were going to with booths and sales? How many of those were effective out of 80? Anyone have any guesses how many of those webinars? I see 5 as a guess. Out of 80 webinars, how many events were driving revenue? I see 5s and I see 0s. You guys are cynical as hell, and I love it. You're welcome here anytime. I see 8. Dang, each one of these events they were going to, it was costing them money. They're spending, time to fly people there. They're spending booth sponsorship. You're right, Dean, they couldn't tell. So we eventually could tell, because one of the first things we did when we started working with them is we're like, holy crap, you guys need to get some ROI tracking set up, because it was number 2, right? We had 1 established, so we had to do number 2. And the answer actually is, it's higher than a lot of the guesses here. It was 30. There's 30 events that were driving revenue. Not bad, right? I mean, that was good. But that meant there was 50 events that they were spending money on that were doing 0 for them. That's crazy. They were able to repurpose that spend, put it into the events that were working to double up on them. And they also were able to do other kinds of marketing with that cash that they'd been burning on those ineffective events. So that's why first touch ROI is so important to set up. How did you best determine that? Yeah, great question. It was moving forward, because one of the things that they found is they were trapped. They couldn't get out of doing these events, because what if that event was one of the ones that was successful? So they kept doing it. So we set this up with them, and they kept doing the events at least one more time to see how things were going. And thankfully the data didn't all come back right away, because then that would freak them out. But slowly over time, over the next year and a half, they were able to get the data in. And then even ongoing to see if maybe it was just a longer sale. And they were able to see there was only about 30 events that were driving revenue over time. But you're right, it's not an instant result, but you got to get that set up, and then it starts collecting the data. Good question. Yeah. Data preparedness is number 3. And this rounds out the section on foundation, the foundation phase. The whole idea is your data, you can answer this question out loud, you can put it in chat, whatever you'd like to do. But here's the question that we ask in the CSI. Is your data clean? Is it free of duplicates? And is it structured for reporting? Clean gets into things like, is it the right data in the right spot? Are people just typing whatever they want into certain fields? Are some things blank that are required and some things aren't? Free of duplicates, obviously. Duplicates happen. So what we're looking for in that particular bullet is, are you on purpose creating duplicates? Is your system generating duplicates on its own, on purpose? Because the ones that get in there on accident, we understand that, and you need processes to clean them up. But as long as you're not purposely creating them, then that's one step forward. I was once working with a company where they had to make a duplicate for every one of their products, and they had about 12 products, and it was crazy, crazy, crazy. Finally, structured for reporting. This is the time and the place on CSI number 3 where we really want to sit down with you and think about campaign tracking. Are things structured so that if you go and set up B2B marketing analytics, that you'll actually have some data to visualize? If you don't set it up early, set up your reporting and structures early and start doing the campaign tracking, nothing will ever show up later on, or it'll take time, like we were talking about. So those 3 things are the things you want to set up right away. Do it in that order, but you really don't want to go to the next phase until you got those things created and those things set up. Okay, quick question. Do you always rely on the first touch? Many times leads will come through a Google organic search, but you find out from them that they were referred by an existing customer, for example. Do you change first touch to reflect reality? Great freaking questions. That's a great question. Jordan, if you don't already have a book, we need to send you one. So shoot me an email, casey@CheshireImpact.com, or we'll reach out. Coolest question I've seen. Great question. Awesome, awesome, awesome. So the last question first. Do you change first touch to reflect reality? Yes, totally. One of the things we do even internally here is we have a report that we look at without sales that shows all the deals that sales has closed. We want to see what's closed. We also have reports to look at leads and their sources as well as their campaigns. We're constantly looking at those things. And then sometimes it doesn't look right, because sometimes what we'll do is we'll put the Pardot first touch campaign next to the Pardot source field, next to maybe the opportunity source field, and they may not line up. One may say, like we had this one particular field said sales sourced, and then they were in the Dreamforce 2019 campaign. Well, that's not, those don't line up. So we'd go in, dive in, look at the Pardot activity record and find out, okay, we did actually meet them at Dreamforce. Was it Salesforce? No. So let's update that field, right? Or maybe they're both wrong. We're going to go look back in that field to make sure, spot check that they're actually up to date. You're right. First touch, not perfect. Certainly not perfect. But you know what? It's a lot more defensible than looking at last touch or middle touch or any of the other action touches. And, you know, one example of that is if I can go in to the CEO, and I did this when I first had Pardot, I was able to go in and say, look, we spent 10 grand on this particular lead source test content syndication that we're doing. And here are the deals that came out of it. And here's the revenue. And it was like over $1 million or something. It was a lot of money for 10K. CEO is instantly like, okay, you can have another 10K. And actually, would you like 20K, right? You know, maybe moments earlier, he had said, no, we don't have any money for you. In fact, can I give you less money next year? And now he's like, nope, here's some more money. In fact, can I give you more money? Now I'm worried, is this thing scalable? Do we have enough volume in this particular lead source? But that's a good problem to have. So when you do first touch, you can have those kind of conversations. Now, if you find out later that some people actually met you at some other point, totally get that. I've had some conversations on the podcast where people are like, everything's bullshit. You can't trust anything. And that's kind of depressing, but you can at least try to pick your battles and get the earliest touch you possibly can get. And that's the first touch. I don't give any credit to last touch. I don't even care. It doesn't matter nearly as much as first touch. That's defensible. But here's an opposite situation. If you go into the CEO's office and she this time is actually asking you questions, and you're like, well, you know, we did all these webinars, or we sent out email campaigns, and we've been a part of 30 deals with that. Can we have more money to do a trade show? It's like, well, did you really help with those deals, or is that just sales helping with those deals? Sometimes you can make your point. Sometimes you can't. It's a lot more gray is the problem. So that's why there is a multi-touch tracking in this roadmap. There is. But guess what? It's not first. It comes later on, because it's actually helpful directionally. But this other stuff at first touch is much more black and white. Cool? All right. Data preparedness, first touch, understanding, foundation phase. If you can nail those, you are just light years in front of everyone else. Growth phase. All right. That's a pretty wild photo. Anyone know where that photo came from? Any guesses? You might be able to guess from the backpacks. I know Kate will know this answer and a few other people. All right. Growth phase. So this next phase is where marketers, Dreamforce. Nice. Michael, you're just like on top of this today. You're like number one here. So growth phase. This is where marketers get to be marketers. You know what? There's only 2 elements, but boy, are they the most of the work, right? So in that foundational phase, there's some work to be done there, but that's done pretty quick. And then you're on to everything else. You may find yourself in growth phase for a while. Yes, I've seen people spend a month on each one of these and get to 10 at the end. Yeah, that's a pretty intense year. But if you want to spend more time in growth, it's totally cool as long as you've done the foundation stuff first. Step 4, element 4, that's where we're talking about gated content marketing. That's where we're trying to line up the content we have, get some indexes, understand what we do have, what we don't have, map it to the buyer's journey, then line those up with landing pages. That's the time for that. And so when it comes to building out lots of landing pages, that's where we're doing that. There's a question earlier of, when you redo these, redo them later, but at least you want to get some solid ones built out now. Now, we're not just building random landing pages. So if you've done that in the past, you might want to give yourself a half score on this one and come back to it because you really want to do a content index. Understand what questions are buyers asking, what are the answers to those questions, and how can you best answer those questions with content. And again, there's a whole webinar, there's a whole, I love chatting about this one. There's a whole thing on it. And then finally, progressive profiling. Does anyone know what progressive profiling is? And if you do, are you using it? Aren't you using it? Know what it is? Don't know what it is? Raise your hand or type it in the chat. Either way. Do but haven't used it? Yeah. Most people have heard of it. In fact, a lot of people buy Pardot because of progressive profiling, but don't necessarily get a chance to set it up yet. So that would be one of the things where even if you got some kick-ass landing pages and you're ready to crush this thing and move on to the next step, you might still want to give yourself a 0.5 on this element just so you come back and do progressive profiling. If you're not doing progressive profiling, you wouldn't give yourself a 1 on this phase because there's some great gains to be had in this phase. So with that, and boy, oh boy, we're running out of time. So let me keep moving here because we don't want to give you a 2-hour webinar for a 1-hour slot. So that's where that phase happens. Multiple nurture campaigns. The key here is multiple. If you've got 1 nurture campaign, that's cool, but you don't get full credit until you have at least 2 or more because we really want you to have a nurture campaign for at least each buyer persona you have, the work you did in the foundation phase, or the different industries you may service, or the different stages in a buyer's process. Just getting multiple nurtures on the table, that's where it works. And guess what? If you've done the content indexing and mapping the buyer's journey, the nurture campaigns fall into place. You already have the content, you have the landing pages, boom, right? So you see how you do it in that order? Nurture is easy at that point. Sometimes people are like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do the nurture campaign. The content index actually answers not only what landing pages to build, but also what nurtures to build. And what do you say first, second, third, fourth? So that's that. Now, after we've done the foundation and after we've done the marketing phase, right, where we built a lot of stuff out, it's time to align with sales. Now, I get it. We can align with sales at all points in time, and that's fun and friendly. But here's the deal. There's a reason why alignment phase is phase 3, because we have to do our jobs first. In fact, I got an email from a really cool kid in Sweden who was like, what's up? I want to align, but should I do that sooner? Yes, but here's the deal. Before you can align, kind of like before you get married, before you do anything with someone else, with a friend, you got to get your own ducks in a row. So what we did in those previously 2 phases is getting our ducks in a row. We did that by getting the foundation stuff nailed. Now we're getting some ROI. That's pretty cool. And we've got some nurtures happening and we've got some landing page happening, which means the leads are coming in. We've increased the lead flow. We've warmed them up a bit. So before they get to sales, they're more educated. So we're doing a good job. Now we can take it a step further by getting even more alignment with sales. And like nothing prevents you from having a meeting with sales throughout this process. In fact, please do. But we kick it into high gear in this phase. 6 and 7, there's 2 parts. First one is sales trained and using Pardot? Do they know about Pardot? Do they know you have it? And is it inside of your Salesforce account? Because we don't need we don't need your sales reps inside of Pardot. Marketing can stay in Pardot. Sales can stay in Salesforce. They stay in their own world, but we can get that information into the account details in front of them, right? So we can put the data in the fields And we can use iframes and drop in some really cool information and some windows into the contact view, the lead view to help them out. There's some really cool stuff there. Chesh, we do a sales training. And one of the things I like to do with that is we like to have someone from our sales team do the training. And I remember doing this myself. I talked to on a sales kickoff down in New Orleans. Hell yeah, sales kickoff in New Orleans. You should have been there. I flew down there and I trained a whole room full of salespeople. And having done some sales myself, they can try to make fun of me, but I can make fun of them back. And so they like pay attention, right? So with this, it's not marketing teaching sales how to sell. Nope. This is just sales telling other salespeople how to do the sales that they do, right? That's it. So sales training, we teach them like, okay, what is this Pardot thing? What is the nurturing that's happening behind the scenes? How can you work with your marketing team? That kind of thing. We also teach them how not to be creepy, right? Just because they can track and see what landing pages and web pages you've been on and all your activity doesn't mean you need to call it out. So we teach them how not to use that so obnoxiously. Finally, after they're using it, we're getting good on that. They're kind of on the same page. They're starting to add people to nurtures. We bring up the lead rating and scoring and grading, right? So two-dimensional lead rating. This is a great time for this. Why? Because on 6, we've got some wins with sales. You start doing 6 successfully, getting them understanding the nurturing, getting them understanding what Pardot's doing, and having them start to use the information that Pardot's capturing. You've got some wins under your shoes so that now when you get to doing grading and scoring, they're actually going to pay attention. If you jump right to 2D lead rating and scoring and you haven't done your work, if your marketing work isn't done in the growth phase, then you get less buy-in and it doesn't work. You're not an equal partner in this situation. You're just distracting them with weird words they don't understand, right? So there's a reason it comes here in part 7. Grading and scoring. Who's doing grading and scoring? Raise your hand if you're doing both. Typically what we find is that people are doing scoring because it's out of the box. By the way, Mary, awesome. No worries. Just grab the recording. Great to see you in here, and great engagement for sure. So grading is how interested you are in them. Scoring is how interested they are in you. You got to do both. You got to do both. Now, if you're not doing both and you got some other numbers that are in this roadmap that need to be addressed, address the lower numbers first. But when you get here, you want to be able to set up grading and scoring. Again, there's a whole webinar on how to do that. Okay. We did it. 3 phases down. Now we get to party. This is the party zone, right? It's not that. No. We're not doing that. We're not doing the laboratory. We're doing the laboratory, okay? We're having fun now. The optimization phase is where you get to hang out forevermore as a marketing hero because you've braved those other steps. And the optimization phase has 3 main elements to it, and they are all around testing, A/B testing and multivariate testing and Pardot, and what to test and when to test. And I just did an awesome webinar on that based on some podcasts, episodes and interviews I've done. If you're interested in this and what to test and how to test, highly recommend you catch the recording or the next time I do that live. Fantastic thing, because I think a lot of times we just test the subject line, and that's not it, right? That's not getting us the results you want an aha moment where suddenly you have 300% increase in leads. That's what you want. So this is the time to get it. You've built all the things in advance. To Vince's earlier question, was it Vince? To your earlier question, yeah, I can't find you anymore, but it was either Vince or Vance. To your earlier question, yeah, this is the time to go back through and be like, how can we improve this? And there's certain things to test first, second, third, fourth, fifth. Then once you've got that set up, advanced dynamic content. Have you guys seen this? This is a cool feature. This is the time to set it up. A lot of people buy Pardot to set this up and then realize there's a lot of homework I got to do before this works. Yeah, all those other steps inside of the roadmap are needed to set this thing up. You need to know your segmentation. You need to have that cold in a dynamic sense in Pardot. You need to have landing page setup. You need to have a lot of different landing page setup. You need some alignment to sales. And then you can turn this thing on and it just works like magic, right? But not until you've done those previous steps. That's why we have it as a roadmap. So you get to this particular part. Quick example, we have one client in the healthcare space, and for them, they sell to hospitals. Very timely time right now. This story came before this whole thing. And one of the things that they found is that public hospitals and private hospitals act differently. They're like two different buyer personas for them. And so they buy in different ways, they research in different ways. So what they wanted to do is use advanced dynamic content, and they actually put it, so the hero banner, the main image on their homepage changed, and the call to actions and the call outs on the right-hand side, the different content that was available would change. So if you were a public hospital, you'd see all the public things. If you're private, you saw all the private things. And you're like, wow. And even the emails started changing the header image. So you saw an image of another public hospital if you're public, or another private hospital. Now the question was, are people public or private? Are prospects? This was a question they didn't have in a field. They didn't necessarily know the answer to this. They could figure out some of them, but some of them they weren't sure. But that didn't stop them. One of the things we did is we set up an email with them, and we sent out to everyone in their list. And it said, we're setting up 2 centers of excellence. One here is for public health and public hospitals and doctors that work in those facilities and staff. This other one here is for private health, with a simple link to either one to go check out the information and resources. But in Pardot, we made those links magical. And so they were actually custom redirects, magic, custom redirect, same thing. If you clicked on it, it tagged you forevermore as public if you clicked on the public one, private on the private one. And by doing this, they were able to have their whole website change. All they needed to know was, are you public, private? And once they found that out, and they made their forms ask this question as well. Once they found it out, the whole thing changed to really customize the journey just to the buyer. And they actually had someone report back. Someone in sales shared that a person purchased and said, look, the reason we went with you guys is because you have such a determination and you have such a focus on private health, right? And then there's another one that was like public health, right? You can imagine people are like, oh, these guys really know us. They're not just all hospitals, they're public hospitals, right? Because of advanced dynamic content. Really cool feature. Totally got to check that out. But it's $9, so you don't want to do it first. You want to do it when you can get there. Awesome, Brent. Hey, great to see you again. I appreciate all the love here on the great webinar and the style and all that. Man, love it. Yeah, it's definitely connect on LinkedIn. And that goes for anyone here. Just shoot me a note on LinkedIn. Look forward to connecting with you. Finally, number 10. And perfect, because we've got like 1 minute left. But that's okay. We'll probably go a little bit over for those that have to bounce. Totally cool. But we'll make sure we get all this stuff covered. All right. Multi-touch tracking happens here. Now we didn't stop. We're not going to do the setup here. The setup happens on number 3. Number 3, we're getting things structured for reporting. Awesome, Kate. Good to see you. Take care. But in this stage, we're actually building out the modeling and we're building out a lot more of the reporting. And because we've done all the other steps, we've structured things for reporting and we've done all the touches. By this point, we're going to have some really juicy information in the multi-touch arena. All right. How to use these numbers? Like if you kept score along with this particular webinar, or when you do a CSI with us, do the audit conversation with us, how to use those results? Well, you keep going. You don't need to stop everything you're doing because Casey said so, as cool as that sounds. You keep doing everything you're doing, but then you find your lowest number in the CSI that's incomplete, and then you address that first. Incomplete could be a 0 or a 0.5. You go there first. So if you gave yourself a 0.5 on understanding your buyer, because you haven't really done any interviews and you don't really have personas and they're not really dynamically being sorted into lists, you start there. And then you go to the next one and the next one and the next one and the next one. And you move through the stages in order. That's how you use the roadmap. Cool. All right. I really want to know my CSI score. How do we make this happen? Well, that's great. In the words of Oprah, by the way, if you haven't seen this, you should go watch this on YouTube. It's great. You get a CSI. You get a CSI. Everyone gets a CSI. Oh my gosh. Right now, I can imagine you're all screaming in your homes and your dogs and your cats are like, what's going on? Well, here's the deal. I want you all to be able to know what your CSI score is. There's no cost to this, right? You need to know. Even if you're not working with Treasure Impact, find out what your CSI score is. So the way we do that is we hop on a call. You, me, call. We talk through this stuff. Now, all you got to do is type in CSI into the chat window, the Q&A. In fact, there's a million other ways we're going to show you how to get that. Yeah, there you go. Type CSI into the chat. And, oh, that's funny. Yeah, so Christina, that goes just to all panelists. So I see that. Interesting. So you type it in to the chat menu. And what we'll do is we'll reach out and we'll schedule a CSI conversation with you. It's not a sales call. We're literally trying to figure out where you're at with Pardot. And then if you do a CSI call with us, we will send you a copy of Marketing Automation Unleashed to read at home during quarantine. All you got to do is type CSI, right? Because why? I'm just literally trying to help, okay? That's all there is to it. There's no sales pitch. There's no anything. We just literally do a CSI with you, help you figure out where you're at. And any guesses from those here? Any guesses what the average score is on a CSI? Any guesses? And by the way, here's some other ways you can type in, you can get your CSI, right? We're here for you. You can type CSI into the Zoom chat, and you could do a Q&A question, right? Okay, yep, I see in there. You could do the Q&A question. I'm writing your name down. Make sure we got you. You can text it to me. You can use a smoke signal. If you know how to make Morse code out of smoke signals and you can get that over to me, that counts too. There's my cell phone. There's my email. There's me on Twitter. All those different ways we will get you scheduled up to do CSI, and you'll know where you're at. You'll know what your next step is and how to get to a 10. Cool. The average, 3.5, close. It's actually 3. And it's not even a statistical average because there's a lot of 1s, 2s, 3s, and then it just drops off. So not very many 4s and 5s and 6s and 7s and 8s. That's where people start. That's their first score. Their initial score is typically pretty low. If you get a 0, that's totally cool. If you get a 5, that's cool. But the whole point then is you're like, okay, we've had a lot of companies that are really successful do this. They say, okay, I'm a 3 right now. I want to be a 6 by the end of the year. What do we got to do to get there? We map it out. Cool. There's some other resources for you. Like I mentioned earlier, every one of those CSI elements has a webinar. There's podcast episodes on it where I interview an expert with like 9,000 times the information I have on these topics. And I just open my brain and they just pour their knowledge in on those podcasts. So there's podcasts on each one of those topics. There's also worksheets, templates. We have build planners. So if you're trying to do a content index, you can do that. They also have them in the book too. So on that CSI offer, if you don't already have that, just type in CSI, email me, whatever, get you the CSI so you're good there. Finally, we're here to help. I'm here to help. And, oh, by the way, this book, I don't know if I mentioned it. There's a chapter on every one of the CSI elements, right? So if you were really curious about advanced dynamic content, there's a whole chapter on it. Boom. Okay, podcast. Has anyone heard this podcast? Anyone heard this one yet? If you haven't, check it out. I have so much fun. These guys are so brilliant. Adele Ravella, I see some hands. Awesome. Check it out. By the way, if there's anyone I should talk to, let me know. Shoot me an email or just tweet at me and tag them or something. Casey@CheshireImpact.com, Casey Chesh on Twitter. Who should I talk to? I'd love to hear if you hear someone that's like brilliant, you're like, I would love you to pick their brain, Casey. I will pick their brain on the podcast. But these have been some great people I've talked to already. It's on all the different channels. YouTube, we have the videos actually. Not too many people check it on YouTube, but I prefer it better because you get to see their faces. And Brian Massey was wearing a lab coat, drinking coffee out of a beaker. And I got to update this slide. Look at that. Over 80 episodes available. There are now over 150 episodes available. Crazy. All right, next step, CSI, get some data, and then launch from there. Cheshire Impact, we do Pardot and Salesforce. Not everyone knows we do Salesforce too, which is really important because a lot of times, like I said in that first slide, you might be rocking your Pardot, but there may be some automation or some sort of weird process that was built 1,000 years ago in Salesforce that might be messing you up. So we're happy to help you out there too. And with that, it is time for the Q&A. We'll end the recording and see if anyone has any questions.